Okay. Now, a macro, everybody, is a feature in Microsoft Excel where you can record your repetitious steps in your Excel spreadsheet so you can automate them. It's all about automation. We're going to find that anybody can make a macro, and then by doing that, you automate your spreadsheets. And then to be able to change a macro, you have to know something about programming, and we'll talk about that as well. Now, sometimes during this session, I'll make my mouse do this so you can find my mouse that way. Now, the macros can be found in two locations. So we can find them under the View menu. If I pick on View, then over here on the right-hand side, we have the macros. Now, that lets you record your macros and view your macros if we go to the View menu. However, I'm going to turn on the Developer menu because with the Developer menu, we get a lot more choices. Now, notice how my Developer menu is not on right now, so we're going to turn it on. Here's how to turn it on. We'll pick on the File menu up top, and under File, I'll pick on Options, and then you get this window. The options, of course, are ways you can control your version of Excel on your computer. Now, we're going to come over here, and I'll pick on the word Customize Ribbon. Now, the ribbon is a new word for the toolbar. Once we click on that, then I'm going to come over here and you check the box where it says Developer. Okay, so we did File and then Options. Then we picked on the word Customize Ribbon, and then you make sure the word Developer is checked right there. I'm going to click on OK. And notice now the Developer menu is now on the toolbar. So let's go with Developer. Here, you have a lot of choices for your macros. Now, a macro can be used to automate just about anything in Excel. The first example that I'm going to show you is a feature in Excel that's called the Advanced Filter. Now, I don't want you to think that the macro is just about the Advanced Filter. It's not. I could use a macro to automate anything. I'm just using this as an example. Here you have a big list of data. This is the data we'll use for the Advanced Filter. Notice how the field names are up top, and it's a big list of data. I'm going to go to Sheet 2. And we see the criteria for the Advanced Filter. So what's really important about the Advanced Filter is that the criteria have the same field names, and then each row is a different row of criteria. So we're going to make a macro to automate the Advanced Filter. So I can show you what a macro is. Now, all macros, no matter what they actually do, they get started the same way. So at this time, we're going to pick on your Developer menu, and then you come over here, and you pick on Record Macro. Then we get this new window. Now, you want to give your macro a name, but the name doesn't like spaces for whatever reason. So I'll type in Run Filter with no spaces. Now, you could use an underscore between the words if you wanted to. It just doesn't like spaces for whatever reason. Now, I'm going to click in this box where it says Shortcut Key, and we can give the macro a keyboard shortcut to make it easier to run. You can use uppercase letters or you can use lowercase letters. So I'll type in uppercase R. So to run that macro, we would use Control-Shift-R. You can also use lowercase letters. So I'll change that to Control-R. So I could use uppercase letters or you can use lowercase letters. I've tried numbers. It really doesn't like numbers at all. For that, you would use uppercase letters or lowercase letters. Why is that important for you? Well, as long as this workbook is open, Control-R is now going to run the macro instead of what it usually does. It's going to override what it usually does when this workbook is open. So you would use a letter that you wouldn't use for something else. So I wouldn't use Control-C because that's my copy, or I wouldn't use Control-V because that's my paste. I can't think of anything I use Control-R for, so that'll be great. Now here's why it's also important. If I store it in this workbook, which is the current workbook, then it'll only be available when this workbook is open. However, if I store it in the Personal Macro Workbook, then it opens up all the time. Every time you go into Excel, it opens up in the background, and then it's available all the time. So maybe you use that for a universal type of macro, something that's always available. In a little while in today's session, I'll show you one that's going to be in the personal macro workbook. We're going to put this one in this workbook. Now, you can type in anything in the description, or you can leave that blank. That's really optional. That's just for documentation purposes only. More importantly, I would give it a good name, but the name doesn't like spaces. We give it a keyboard shortcut of Control-R, and we're going to store it in this workbook. And you can type in anything that you wanted to in the description, or you can leave that blank. All macros, no matter what they actually do, they get started that way. So we picked on the developer menu, and I picked on record macro. At this time, I'll click on OK. We're now recording our macro. Here's how you can tell. You see a little square down here at the bottom. You see it? Now, we're going to leave that square there until we're done recording. So as long as you see that square, you can do as many steps in your Excel workbook, and they're going to be recorded. So maybe next is copy and paste, or print, or delete a row, or insert a row, or as many steps as you want it to do. We're going to do the advanced filter as an example. Now, when I do the advanced filter, I'm going to count the steps so that we'll see how many steps it's going to save us at the end. To run the advanced filter, I'll go back to the sheet that's called Europe Expenses, and I'm going to call that Step 1. I'm going to click on cell A1, and that'll be Step 2. To do the advanced filter, we pick on the Data menu up top, Data, and then I'll pick on the word Advanced, which means Advanced Filter. When I picked on Data, that was the third step, and I'll pick on the word Advanced. And now we see a window that's called Advanced Filter, and that was Step 4. Everything is fine on this window, except where it says Criteria Range. I'm going to click where it says Criteria Range. That's Step 5. Now, I just showed you how the criteria is on Sheet 2. So I'll pick on Sheet 2 at the bottom, Step 6, and I want to highlight the criteria from A1 to F5. Now, when you're doing your advanced filter, you want to include the field names and then go down as many rows that actually have the information. You don't want to include any blank rows or any blank columns. That's why I went from A1 to F5. So that was Step 7. I'm going to click on OK. And now notice how there's less records because it's only going to show you the records that meet the criteria. That's the whole point of the advanced filter. And that was Step 8. We're still recording our macro. Here's how you can tell. There's a little square at the bottom. See the square? So I could do even more steps after that. I could do copy and paste, or print, or delete a row, or format, whatever you want to do. And there's many steps that you wanted to do. So when you're done recording your macro, now you're going to click on that square. Let's see what the square says. It says, a macro is currently recording. Click here to stop recording. Now when we click on that square, it will stop recording and it'll turn to something different. It's not going to be that exact square anymore. Okay, good. We just recorded our first macro. What does that mean? Well, you have to really see it run. So I'll go back to Sheet 2. At this time, I want to change the criteria. So I'll type in Austria here, type in Spain here. Now I'll come over here and type in hotel. Now I have different criteria. I want to rerun the advanced filter. We made a macro out of that, and I used the keyboard shortcut of Control-R, and I counted 8 steps. So I'm going to do Control-R on my keyboard. So I'll do Control-R. That should rerun the macro, which should rerun the advanced filter with the new criteria, except I reduced it down to 1 step. We went from 8 steps down to 1 step. That's the entire point behind a macro. So you got to think, okay, what's repetitious in my Excel workbook? What do I do every single day? Well, that could be a great macro. All right, so let's try it again. I'll pick on Sheet 2, and then here I'll change this to dinner. This one will be hotel, and this one will be taxi. I want to rerun the advanced filter again, so I'll do Control-R. Control-R is going to rerun the macro, which will rerun the advanced filter, except I reduced it down to 1 step. So you got to think, okay, what's repetitious in my Excel spreadsheet? What do I do every single day? That can make a great macro. We just went from 8 steps down to 1 step. What if that was 30 steps? What if that was 90? If you get this right, you can save so much time because you just automated the whole process. So now remember, a macro can be used to automate, anything in Excel, not just the advanced filter. So before we continue, let's make sure we save this the proper way. Now let's get all the records back for the advanced filter. So to do that, I'll pick in the word data, and then I'll pick in the word clear, and everything is back from the advanced filter. The filters are always temporary. Now, I want to make sure that we know how to save this the proper way. So I'll pick on the save icon. Now look what it says. The following features cannot be saved in macro-free workbooks. The VB project, which really is the macro. VB means Visual Basic, and we'll see what that is in just a few minutes. It says to save a file with these features, click No. So the correct answer on this window is no. I'll pick on the word no. Now you'll pick on the word browse, and then you're on your classic Save As window that you've seen a million times. I'm going to click where it says Excel Workbook, and then you want to save it as a macro-enabled workbook. Otherwise, you will lose your macro, plain and simple. You have to save it as a macro-enabled workbook, or you will lose your macro, plain and simple. Now, it's going to make a different file with a different file extension. The normal file extension for Excel is XLSX. The file extension for a macro workbook is XLSM, M for macro. So we'll click that. We'll pick on Save. And now that was the proper way to save a workbook that has a macro. That was really important that we saw that. So far, let's go back to our slides. Here's the original data. And then in this case, when I made this slide a long time ago, then I used the View menu. And under the View menu, there's another way to record your macro. You can pick on macros and then record macro. But the way I just showed you was I picked on the Developer menu and I picked on Record Macro there. Either way is fine. I just like the Developer menu because it gives you more choices for your macros. And then here's the screen where we gave it a name and we called it Control-R with a keyboard shortcut, and we put it in this workbook. At that time, we were recording our macro, and you can see that little square down here at the bottom. That's how you can tell you're recording. And then here is where I saved it just a minute ago. So we pick on Save. Now in this window, you make sure you pick on No there, and then you save it as the Excel Macro Enabled Workbook. So those are some slides that we've seen so far. Now let's see some ways to run a macro. So let's go back to Excel now. We'll come back to that workbook pretty soon. One way to run the macro is the manual way. If I pick on the Developer menu, Developer, and I pick on the word macros, then I can click on this macro and then be able to pick on the word run at that time. Now you see the one that's called personal and it says page setup. Well, I'm actually going to delete that because we're gonna work with that one a little bit later on. I'm going to re-record that one for you. So let me delete that. Okay, so it's talking about the hidden workbook. We'll talk about that pretty soon when we do the personal workbook. So I'll probably re-record that one for you. But anyway, here's the one that's called Run Filter. One way to run that is to pick on the word Run, and then that would go there. Another way to run it is to do the keyboard shortcut like I showed you. So I'll type in France here, type in Italy. Remember how I gave it the keyboard shortcut, so I'll do Control-R, and that reran the macro. Now, pretty soon I'll show you how you can change what the keyboard shortcut is or how to view that. Now, another way to run a macro is to assign it to a button. So imagine right about here, I have a button that if I click on it, that will run the macro. Let me show you how to do something like that. We'll pick on our Developer menu. And then on the Developer menu, you pick on the word Insert right there. And then these are called controls. I'm going to show you a couple of these controls today. These are ways to make the spreadsheet easier to work with for you or for another person. The one I'm going to use right now is the one that looks like a rectangle. It's called a button. Right? So if I move my mouse there, it says the word button. I'm going to click that. and I'll move it right about here, and I'll click there. Now when I click that second time, it wants me to assign a macro to that button. So I'll pick on Run Filter, and I'll pick on OK. Notice now it says button. Of course, I want that to say something different. So I'm going to right click on the button, and I'll say Edit Text. Now let me show you something for a second. Here's what happens. If you right click on that and hold down the right mouse button too long, you get this weird menu. If you get that weird menu, just right click it really quickly, and then you'll get the main menu. All right, so if you ever get this menu, it means you held down the right mouse button too long. If you get that, just right click on it, and then pick on the word Edit Text. Now you can change the text there. I'm going to delete the text that's already there, and then I'll say Run Filter. Now it's okay if that one has spaces. The only place that it didn't like spaces is the actual macro name. Now when the button looks like that, I can resize it, or I can move it. What I did was I right clicked on the button. From here you can say Edit Text. You can assign it to a different macro. We can resize it, or we can move it. So how does the button work? Well, here I'll type in lunch, type in breakfast, hotel. Now we have different criteria. Now I don't have to remember the keyboard shortcut. I'll just pick on the word Run Filter, and that will run the macro, as you can see. So that's another way to automate your spreadsheets. What I did was I picked on your developer menu, and I picked on Insert, and then we used this button right over here. I might as well do it again for you. Then we clicked over here somewhere. I picked on the macro that we want to run, click on OK. To change the text of that, I'm going to right click on that, and I'll say Edit Text. Now I'm going to get rid of that button. To get rid of that button, I'm going to right click on it, and then I'll say Cut. Good. Now another way to run a macro is to put it up here in the Quick Access toolbar. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and click on the arrow to the right of the Quick Access toolbar, and then we'll pick on the word More Commands. Now this is a way to add things to the Quick Access toolbar in general. Like for example, if I picked on the word Copy there, and if I pick on the word Add, now it's on the right hand side, which means it's going to be on the Quick Access toolbar. So what does this have to do with macros? Well, I'm going to come over here and click on the pull down, and I'll pick on macros. Then you'll see the macros. Now I'm going to pick on the one that's called Run Filter, and I'll pick on Add. And now it's on the right hand side, which means it's going to be on the Quick Access toolbar. If I want to change the icon of that macro, when I click on it, I'll pick on the word Modify, and then you have many icons to choose from. For example, maybe I'll pick on the little funnel, which people know that as a filter, and I'll change the text to say Run Filter. And it's okay to have spaces in that one as well. That'll be the text that they see when they move the mouse across that icon. You can see the icon changed. Now it says Run Filter. So I'll click on OK. Now it's on the Quick Access toolbar. So once again, I'll type in Austria, Spain, and I'm going to click on the new icon. Notice how it says Run Filter, and that'll run the macro which runs the advanced filter. So that's what that slide was talking about, the 4 ways to run a macro. Another way is with the graphic. We can do it that way as well. So let's try something like that. So I'll pick on Sheet 2. With this button that we did, by picking on Developer and picking on Insert, I can't really do too much with it. If I right-click on it, then I have the Format tab, but notice how everything is grayed out. I really can't change the colors of that or do too much with that. Let me show you ones that will give you more flexibility. In this case, I can pick on the Insert tab, and then either I can assign the macro to a picture or to a shape. So I'll pick on shapes, and this time we'll use the oval. And I'll click over here. Now I'm going to type inside there. I'll say Run filter, and we see the text for that. Now we can format text as always. I can just highlight the text. In this case, I'll pick on home and make it centered. Okay, good. So what does this have to do with macros? I'm going to right-click on this item. First of all, if I pick on the Format menu, then notice how everything lights up. I can change the background color, the fill color, the outline. So when I make one of those shapes, one of the benefits is that I can, really make it look the way I want it to look using the Format menu, whereas this one I couldn't do that. Then how do I make that run a macro? Well, I'm going to right-click on that object, that shape, and then look what it says, assign a macro. And then I'll pick on Run Filter, and now that's a live button now. I'm going to go ahead and click that, and now that'll run the macro, as you can see. So what I did from there is I said insert and then shapes, and any of those shapes can be worked like that. They can be formatted better, and then what you do is you right-click on the shape to either edit the text or assign a macro. And then let's kind of complete that thought. Another thing it can be assigned to is a picture. So we'll pick on the Insert menu, we'll pick on Picture, and then let's use, what if we use the gas pump, just as an example. So I'll resize that. I'm going to right-click on it, and look, it says Assign Macro. So that could even run a macro as well. Really, a macro can be run by a lot of different things. You could probably right-click on a chart, and you would see the choice that says Assign Macro. Here we used a picture, a shape. There's that button that we first used. So the macro can be assigned to all of those different items. It just helps it make it be more automatic. So I'm actually going to delete these two items. So when I click on this one, that actually ran the macro. I'll right-click on it, then I can cut it. And we'll right-click on this one and pick on Cut. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now, once you save it as the macro-enabled workbook, it'll be like that from that point forward. You only have to do that the first time. Now, let's go to our slides and see where we are at this time. It looks like in this case, I'm doing the developer toolbar. So we pick on File and then Options. Then okay, this is where we're adding it to the Quick Access toolbar. So notice how I picked where it says Popular Commands, and instead I picked on Macros. Then you see your macros, you click on that, and you pick on Add. That's how you add it to your Quick Access toolbar. And then this is where I pick the icon. You click on this macro over there, and you pick on Modify, and you get the screen, and you click any of those icons. So now I'd like to show you what the macro looks like. So we'll go back to Excel. At this time, we're going to pick on your Developer menu, and we'll pick on the word macros over here. We're back to this window. Now, again, I'll show you what the personal workbook is in just a little bit. Now, I'm going to pick on the one that's called Run Filter, and I'll pick on the word Options. Now, here's where we can change the keyboard shortcut or the description. So those are easy to change. You just click on the macro, and you pick on Options. Then you can view or change the keyboard shortcut or the description. Now, if you needed to, you can delete that macro. Sometimes the more complicated ones take a few times before you get it right. So you would delete it, re-record it until you get it right. So you could delete the macro if you wanted to. It looks like I can edit that macro. So I'll pick on Edit. Now this is the Visual Basic Programming Language, or it's called VBA. Let me show you why it's called VBA. Look up here. It says Visual Basic for Applications, VBA. So it's a full programming language. So I'm going to show you some examples, but of course you would need a lot more training for that. Now, you can buy books about that topic or take courses on that topic. You might have to take a whole semester, if not more, to get really good at that. If you ever buy a book or take a course on that topic, make sure it says VBA for Excel or macros for Excel. Otherwise, you might be going down the wrong path, okay? So if you ever buy a book or take a course on that topic, make sure it says macros or VBA for Excel. Now, I'm going to show you what we have here, and then we're even going to change some of this code. This is the code that got recorded when we made the macro. This is the code that runs when we run the macro. Now, the only reason that you'd have to go into this window is if you want the macro to do something different. If you record it and it works the way you want it to work, then that's fine. You don't have to touch it. You would only go into this screen if you want to do something different. The first line says the word sub. That means subroutine or subprogram. That's the beginning of the macro. Then we see the word run filter, and that's the name that we gave it. You see the lines that are in green? Well, those are comments. It really ignores those as if they're not even there. What makes them a comment is that little apostrophe at the beginning. So if you wanted to get rid of, if you wanted to just add a comment line, you start the line off with an apostrophe. So you can have as many of those in your code as you need. You just start the line off with an apostrophe and it becomes a comment. You can actually put that at the end of the line as well. So I'm going to click at the end of this line. I'll type in a space and I'll type in an apostrophe and I'll say this line selects the Europe expenses sheet. Now, if I leave that line, notice how everything after the apostrophe is now green. So I can start the line with the apostrophe, or I can put the apostrophe at the end of the line, and then that makes that line a comment. That makes the end of the line a comment as well. Now, remember the first thing I did when I made the macro, I went back to that sheet. So this is the code that goes back to that sheet, Europe expenses. Then if you remember, I clicked on cell A1. Here it says range A1 select. Now, I'm sure that these three lines are really not even important. So I'm sure I can delete those three lines and just delete them. But I'm not sure why they're even there, but that's okay. I'm sure I could delete those if I wanted to. They're not important. Now, this line says something about the advanced filter. So I guess that's where the macro runs the advanced filter. If you look on the right side of that line, there's a little underscore right there. So the underscore means it continues on to the next line. So the line that says sheets and sheet 2, that's a really continuation of the previous line. I can tell because of the little underscore over there. And then we have end sub, and that's the end of the macro. Up here we had sub. Down here we have end sub. They kind of go together. That's part of the structure of the macro. So sometimes when you record the macro, you can see dozens, if not hundreds of lines. This one's not so terrible. Now, we're going to change this macro a little bit to make it do something different. I would like it to ask the user, are you sure you want to run the macro? And then give them the choice to pick yes or no. So here's a small example of changing the code. So I'm going to click at the end of the screen line and then hit the enter key a couple times. And that gives you some blank lines. You can have as many blank lines as you need. Sometimes I'll add a blank line between a section of code to add some separation or make it more legible. And you can have as many blank lines that you need. Now, I'm just going to type this in, and then I'll tell you what it means. I'll type in the word dim, and I'll type in the word answer. That means we're going to set up our field to be used within the program, and you have to dim it. I think dim means dimension, but whatever it means, all I know is you have to dim a field to use that field within a program. Now, in a larger program, you would have several dim statements, each one making up its own field. So that's going to make up a field that's called answer. I'm going to hit the enter key at the end of that line. Now, I want to ask the user a question. The way we can do that is with something that's called a message box. So I'll type in answer equals. Now, message box is spelled M-S-G-B-O-X. M-S-G-B-O-X, and it's pronounced message box. It's really going to show a message on the screen. Now, this is going to work a lot like an Excel function. So I'm going to type it in open parentheses. And just like an Excel function, it's trying to give me the syntax of that function. So the syntax would be really helpful when you get more into programming. The prompt has to be in quotes. So I'll do open quotes. Now I can type in anything between the quotes. So I'll say, are you sure you want to run the filter? I'm asking the other person, are you sure you want to run the filter? Now I'm going to close the quotes. Now just like an Excel function, the parts of the function will be separated with a comma. So I'll type in a comma. Now it's trying to help us. The Visual Basic Editor does help you from time to time. It's trying to ask me what kind of buttons I want for my message box. So I'm going to scroll down and we'll double click on VB yes, no. Double click. That's going to put that into the code and we'll close the parentheses. So that line says answer equals message box, open parentheses, open quotes. Are you sure you want to run the filter? Close quotes, comma, VB yes, no, close parentheses. So that's going to ask that question to the other person, and then they can pick either yes or no. They'll have buttons for that, and then whatever they choose will be stored into a field that's called answer. Now I want to evaluate what they chose for the answer, so we'll use an if. The if statement is probably the most widely used statement in all of programming. So I'll say if answer equals. Now they either pick yes or no to that question. The Visual Basic equivalent for the word yes is the word VB yes. So I'll type in VB yes. Spelling is going to be important here. So I'll do VB yes. Now with the if, it always ends with the word then. We call that an if then. So I'll type in the word then. That line says if answer equals VB yes, then. That means they picked yes to that question. If they picked yes to that question, I want the advanced filter to run, and those lines are already there from before. However, if they picked no to that question, then I want something else to happen. So I'm going to come over here, click right before the letter E of the word end sub, and I'll hit the enter key a few more times to get some more blank lines. I'm going to go to one of the blank lines and I'll type in else. The else is the false part of the if. So if the if is true, everything between the word if and the word else is going to run. But if the if is false, then everything after the word else is going to run. So the else is the false part of the if. Now, if they picked no to that question, I don't want anything to happen. But I want to tell them nothing happened to make them feel better. So I'm going to type in message box, like we spelled it before, message box, open parentheses, open quotes, and I'll say, okay, nothing happened. I'm going to tell them that nothing happened to make them feel better. I'm going to close the quotes and close the parentheses. So the syntax here is very important, and the spelling is very important. So, but you have to take a course or buy a book to get really good at this. We can't do it in an hour webinar. It would take a lot longer than that. So there's courses and books you can buy about the topic. Make sure it would say VBA or macros for Excel. That line says message box, open parentheses, open quotes, okay, nothing happened, close quotes, close parentheses. Now, anytime that we have an if, then somewhere below that, we have to type an end if. And that'll be the end of the structure, and that's really important. So I'll type an end if. And then we have end sub, and that was already there from before. Now, I would make one more change to this code. You see how these lines between the if and the else are indented over here? Well, that makes it easier to read, and it's kind of industry standard. It's what people expect to see. You don't have to do it, but it certainly makes it easier to read, and it's kind of the industry standard. We'll also indent the line between the else and the end if. So I'm going to click before the M of the message box and just hit the tab key, and that'll indent that. It doesn't change what the code does. It just makes it easier to read, and most people do that. You don't have to, but many people do that. It just just looking at that just makes it easier to read. We know that, these lines go with the if, and this line goes with the else, and so on. So we're going to close this window. So what you do is you come up to the top and go to the right-hand side, and it'll be a red X. So the red X, we're going to click that. Now we're back to here. Now, of course, that was a lot of work, so I'm going to save it again. We'll click on Save. Let's see what we just did. So we'll change the criteria again. I'll type in Spain, type in Germany, Italy, and over here we'll type in snack. All right. Now I'm going to click where it says Run Filter. Remember that was one of those buttons. We're going to click that. Now look, this is a message box. Are you sure you want to run the filter? Oh, I don't want to run the filter. Click on No, and it says OK, nothing happened. Remember how that was the second message box, right? So I'll click on OK, and nothing really does happen. We'll pick on Run Filter again, and we'll pick on Yes, and now that'll run the advanced filter with the new criteria, as you can see. So it's all about automation. It's all about trying to make it easier for the other person. So now we recorded the macro, we assigned it to the button, and then we took a look at the code. So I picked a developer, macros, and then we're in the code. Well, let me close that window. What I really did was developer and then macros, and then I picked a word that's called Run Filter, and I picked on Edit. And then we're back into the code. What I recommend to everybody is record the macro. Let it do as much as it can for you, and then you would go into the screen if you have to do something different. But of course, you need more training for that. Now, I'd like to make a macro that's going to be in the personal macro workbook and show you what that's about. Let's see where we are on the slides. So this is where we made the macro. In this case, this is where we turned on the developer toolbar. So I picked on File and then Options. Then I picked on the Customize ribbon, and you make sure the word Developer is checked right there. And then we would have the Developer toolbar, as you can see. Then at this time, this is the screen where we went to look at the keyboard shortcut. Oh, this is where we assigned the macro to a button. Yeah, there's the button, and then we were able to right-click on the button, and then this is where we assigned the macro to a graphic. You could do this to any picture or a graphic or a shape. You would right-click on it, and then you say Assign Macro. We can also get to the macros under the View menu, of course, but you get more choices under your developer screen. And then this is a way to run the macro by picking on the word Run on that window. And then here's some of the code. Here's the change that I made to the code. So you should be able to get the presentation from the webinar or from Compliance IQ. I'm sure they can send you the PowerPoint because that does have that code that we changed. Now let's go back to Excel. I want to give you some more material here, of course. I want to show you what the personal macro workbook is and how to use that. When you make a macro in the personal macro workbook, it'll always be available because the personal macro workbook opens up kind of in the background. So let's record a macro in the personal macro workbook so that we can manage that. The reason that you might use the personal workbook is something that you want to use all the time. In this case, I'm going to do a page setup. Now this, let me save this one. This workbook right now does not have a page setup. So I'll pick on, well, let me get all the records back from the filter. I'll pick on the data menu and I'll pick on clear. If I do File, Print, here's my print preview. And if I had my page setup set up, then I would have the company name and the page number and the date. So you can see it's not there right now. Well, we're going to make a macro that'll do the page setup. However, I'm going to put it into the personal macro workbook so it'll be always available for any workbook. Let's see how we're going to do that. So I'll pick on the developer toolbar and we'll pick on record macro. Now I know I already have one that's called page setup, so I'll call this one new page setup. This time I'll give it a keyboard shortcut of Control E. I can't think of anything I'm using Control E for. And we're going to store it in the personal macro workbook. That's the key step here, and I'll show you how to manage that. And then I can type in anything for the description. So the macro name, well, let me type in something in the description. I'll show you where that lands. So I'll say this will be the page setup. So the macro name is new page setup. I gave it a keyboard shortcut of Control E. I'm going to store the macro in the personal macro workbook, and I typed in something in the description this time, although that is optional. So I'll click on OK. We're now recording. You can tell because of the little square down here in the corner. Now I'm going to do the steps for the page setup, and they're going to be recorded in the macro. So to do the page setup, I'll pick on Page Layout, and then Print Titles. And that brings me back to our classic screen that's called Page Setup. So over here, I'll pick on Header and Footer, and I'll pick on the word Custom Footer. So for the, I'll type in the company name, Compliance IQ. In the center section, I'll do the page number, which is this icon over there. In fact, I'll type in the word of, and then I'll click on this icon, which is the number of pages. So it'll say 1 of 2 and 2 of 4, you know, those kind of things. So I did the page number icon, I typed in the word of, and then I did the number of pages. Then over here, we'll have the date. This icon means the date, and I'll type in a space, and then I'll click on the icon for the time, and that'll be the date time stamp. Now, I'm doing a lot of steps here, and they're all being recorded within the macro. But this time we're doing the page setup. You can see what it's going to look like, and I'll click on OK. Now, I'm still recording, so I want to stop recording the macro. I'm going to go ahead and click on the little square down there, and then I'll stop recording. Now, let's see if the page setup really worked. I'll click on File and then Print. Here it says page 1 of 11, Compliance IQ, and you see the date and time there. And now I'm on the next page, Compliance IQ, 2 of 11, and we see the date and time. So you can see the page setup worked. Now, I'm going to close this window. We'll say File, Close, and we'll save it. Notice how it's still saving as the macro enable workbook. Now, this one doesn't have a page setup yet. I'll do File and then Print. And notice how the page setup is not there yet. We're on a different workbook, right? But the personal macro workbook is still open up in the background. So I'm going to do Control E on my keyboard. Control E. Now watch. If I do File, Print, now the page setup is there. So the personal macro workbook opens up. It's kind of in the background. I'll show you what I mean about that in just a second. And it's always available. So let's close this workbook. Save it. So you can see there's not a workbook open right now, except the personal workbook is still open. And I'll just run it for you again. Let's go back to, how about this one? Here, the page setup is not there yet. I'll do File, Print. You can see how the page setup is not there on this workbook. Then I'll do Control E to run the page setup macro, and now it is there. So I just saved myself a lot of time. I made a macro that'll automate the page setup, and I put it in the personal macro workbook so it's always available. So I can just run that, and the page setup is right there. So I'm going to close this file, and we'll save it. Now let me show you how to get to a macro that's in the personal macro workbook. In this case, I'll pick on your Developer tab, and I'll pick on Macros. So here's one I maybe made in a different session, and here's the one that we just made. Now if I try to pick on Edit there, look what it says. It says it cannot edit that macro on a hidden workbook. Unhide the workbook using the unhide command. So now let me show you how you're going to get to the ones that are on the personal macro workbook. You're going to pick on the View menu up top, and then here it says Unhide. Now that won't be available unless you actually record a macro into the personal macro workbook. So that's really important. You have to make a macro in the personal macro workbook first, and then you'll see a View and then Unhide. There's the personal workbook, and I'll click on OK. Now, usually there's not going to be anything on the actual spreadsheet, but notice how up here we're on a different workbook. It says personal. Now we should be able to get to those macros. So I'll pick on Developer and then Macros. Notice how it doesn't say the word personal anymore because now we're in the personal workbook. So there's the new page setup. I could pick on the options there. That's how you can see where the keyboard shortcut is with the options. But this time it'll let me edit that, as you can see. Now notice how this macro has lots of lines, but you can kind of figure out what's going on here. The Visual Basic Programming Language is actually the one that's the most like English. So if you look at this, you can figure out what's going on to a degree. Here it says something about page setup. Here is where I typed in the company name. Here's the page number and the number of pages. Here's the date and time. Right, so you can kind of see some things that are familiar there. This one has all the other options for the page setup in there as well. So I could change that if I wanted to, of course. So actually, I'll type in a space between compliance IQ. Okay. Or they might tell me that there's not a space there. So I'm just showing you how I can change the code. Now we're going to close this window with the X up top. Put that away. Now, let me give you a big tip here. If you recorded a macro in the personal macro workbook and you did an unhide on that, like we did a few minutes ago, you looked at the code by picking on Developer and then Macros, and you pick on Edit. We're going to close the code here. Now, here's the important step. You want to make sure that you hide the personal workbook again. If you don't hide it, then every time you go into Excel, it'll open up with this workbook up here, the personal workbook. So you want to hide that. In this case, I'll pick on the View menu, and I'll pick on the word Hide. Now, another thing that you want to do is close out of Excel completely so that you can save your personal macro workbook. So I'm going to close out of Excel altogether, and then look what it says. Do I want to save my personal macro workbook? Yes, I do. So when you make something in your personal workbook, then you can change the code if you wanted to, but I would make sure you hide it again, and then make sure you close out of Excel completely so it'll save. Let's go back into Excel now. Now I want to show you that it's going to be available every time you go into Excel. So I'm going to go into this workbook. Right now the page setup is not there. See how the page setup is not there yet? Well, I'll do Control E, and now it just ran the page setup from the personal macro workbook, and now the page setup is there. Can you see how much time that would save you? So if you put something in the personal workbook, it'll always be there. See how it's there. It's just hidden, as you can see. Anyway, hopefully you have some good ideas about your personal macro workbook. Now, another thing I want to show you is what your relative references are and how to manage those. So we're going to use this workbook as an example. I would like to make a macro that's going to delete the current line. So, I'd like to be able to click on that line and then run the macro, and it'll delete that line. Now, first, I'm going to make it without the relative references on, and then we'll see what happens, and we'll make a macro with the relative references. We're going to make a new macro here. So I'll pick on Developer and Record Macro. And I'll call this one Delete Line. Now this time I'll give it a keyboard shortcut of Control, how about Control T? Now this time I'm going to put it just in this workbook. Okay? So I'm going to call it delete line. Control T is the keyboard shortcut, and we'll save it in this workbook. There's already Control T, so how about Control Y? Good. So notice how we're recording. In this case, I'm going to right-click on that row. I'm going to click on column A of that row. I'm going to right-click. I'll pick on delete the entire row. Click on OK. Now watch row 10. It did in fact delete. Now of course I could do more with my macro, but I'm going to stop recording. Now I want the macro to delete the current line, but watch what's going to happen with this one. I'm going to click on a cell. I want it to delete row 14, right? But watch what's going to happen. It's really going to delete row 10 when I run this. So I'll do Control Y. Watch row 10. It says Tom Boyarsky. And notice how that's the line that deleted. And you can see we're on row 10 right now. Let me show you what happened. So when I recorded the macro, the relative references were not on. So let's take a look at the macro code. I said developer, macros. See how these say the word personal there. But there's the delete line, and I'll pick on edit. See how it's always going back to row 10. It says range A10 select, and then delete the row. So that macro just always goes back to row 10. On the other hand, this time when I make the macro, I'm going to turn on the relative references so we can see what that means. So I'll pick on the word developer, and I'll say use relative references. And you can tell that it's on because now that icon is a different color when I move my mouse away from that. The relative references means the macro is going to run from where you are relative on that spreadsheet. So let's make the macro again. I'll pick on developer, record macro. I'll call this one delete line 2, and this time we'll use delete line 2, and this time we'll use Control. How about Control O? And I'll store it in this workbook. Notice how we're recording. I'm going to click on column A of that row. I'm going to right click on that row, and I'll pick on delete, and I'll say entire row. So I'm doing the exact same steps. The only difference is this time I turn on the relative references. So I'll click on OK, and row 12 is going to delete. Now I'm going to stop recording by picking on the square over here. This time I'm going to go to row 17. I want to delete row 17. If I do Control O, watch row 17 where it says Leanne Norton, and that's the row that deleted. However, if I do Control Y, it's going to go back to row 10. See, look at row 10, the one that says John Harris. That's the one that deleted. Let me show you the difference. This time I'll pick on your developer menu and I'll pick on macros. There's delete line and delete line 2. So you want to give your macros a good name. If they're all called macro 1 and macro 2, it gets really confusing really quickly. So you want to give your macros a good name. Let's go to delete line 2 and I'll pick on edit. By the way, when you're on the screen, you could see the code for more than one macro. They're separated by the line there. So that's why you want to give them a good name as well, because you can make sure that you're in the right section. You see the one that says delete line? That one is always going back to row 10. And that'll delete row 10. But then we turn on the relative references on, and you get something that says active cell that offset. That means it's going to basically run it from the current cell. So it says 0, -1. That means stay in the same row, but go one column to the left. So this is the number of rows that you want to move, and this is one of the number of columns that you want to move. So I want to stay in the same row, but move one column to the left. So that means it's going to delete the current row. This one always goes back to row 10. This one we turn on the relative references, and it's going to run it from the cell where you are, stay in the same row, and then delete that row. So I'm sure you can find uses for the relative references so that the macro will run from your current cell instead of always going back to a specific cell. And then the way we turned that on was on the developer menu, and you see the word relative references right there. If I want to turn that back off again, I'll just click on that again, and now it's back off. So now I'm going to save it. Now remember what I said, if the workbook has a macro, then we want to save it the right way. So let's do this one. We'll save it. Here's that message that we saw. In this case, I'm going to say no. Now, even on this window, I can choose Excel Macro Enabled Workbook, and then make sure you pick on Save. Let's do one more example here. I want to show you another place where you can use the Visual Basic Code. Let's do File, Open, and we'll go back to the multiple combo boxes. Now, look at this one. I'll show you how these are called combo boxes. I'll show you how to add those in. If I click on this first one, it has some states, and I'll pick on New Jersey. And if I pick on the second one, it has the cities for New Jersey. If I click on the first one, I'll pick on New York, and then the second one has the cities for New York. Notice how it's changing dynamically. So first of all, let me show you how to add these controls in. This is another use of your developer menu. So I'll pick on the word developer, and I'll pick on the word insert right there. Now, if I want to assign macros to the controls, then I would use these controls up here. Like, remember how we did the command button, and we were able to assign a macro to that. But these ones down here, you can actually go in and generate the code directly. So this is going to be a combo box, and I'll move it right over here and click there. Now, just by doing that, that's not enough. We have to tell it how to make it work. So you click on that object, and you pick on the word properties on your developer menu. So there's many things you can change here, but actually there's only two properties that are important. So for the link cell, I'll type in A11. And for the list fill range, I'll type in A1:A4. If you notice, that's where I have the states over here. So the link cell is where the text is going to land when I pick one, and the list fill range is where it's going to get the data from. Here I have A1 through A4, which is the list of states. I'm going to close that window. Now, that one actually works now. Now, to do these controls, you're going to leave design mode. So I'll pick on the word design mode, and now that one works. It's getting the data from the list fill range, column A, right? And I'll pick one of those, and it fills in cell A11, that was the linked cell. Let's try that again. On the developer menu, I'll pick on Insert, and I'll pick on this combo box over here, the ones in the ActiveX category, and we'll move it right over here. Remember, we have to go into the properties to tell it how to make it work. The link cell this time will be A14, and the list range will be C1:C3, which is the list of cities over here. I'm going to close that window. Again, to make it work, I have to leave design mode. So now this one will pull up the states, and this one will pull up the cities. But notice how A14 filled in because that was the link cell for that combo box. But now notice how if I pick on New York here, this one still has the cities for New Jersey. These two don't change yet. But if I pick on this state, then this one has the cities for Pennsylvania. So when I made this spreadsheet a long time ago, I made these controls the exact way that I just showed you on how I made these ones. But let me show you how this one is more dynamic. I'll show you an example of the code. Now I'm going to go back into design mode up there. See design mode? You can tell you're in design mode again because the icon changed to a different color. I'm going to pick on this one. This one has the name of combo box 1, as you can see, and I'm sure this one has the name of combo box 2. This is combo box 1. This is combo box 2. So then I'll come up here on your developer menu and pick on the word view code. So again, I type this in. It's that Visual Basic Code. So, or the VBA. Remember VBA, Visual Basic for Applications. So it says if combo box 1, if the first one equals NJ, then combo box 2 will get its information from column C. If combo box 1 equals New York, then combo box 2 will get its information from column D. If combo box 1 equals Pennsylvania, then combo box 2 will get its information from column E. And if combo box 1 equals Delaware, then combo box 2 will get its information from column F. Notice how I have 4 end-if statements because I have 4 if statements, so they have to match up. So in fact, let's line these up a little bit better. I'm going to indent those so things can line up better. So now we can kind of see what goes together based on the indent. All right, so I can tell that this if goes with this end if, this if and this else and this end if go together. This if and this else and this end if go together. And then this if and else and end if go together. So that's why you might indent the code. It just makes it easier to work with. And many people do that. So now let me share how I did that. These ones don't have the code yet. So you make the controls like I showed you, and then you pick on View Code, and then you would type in the code for that, okay? So now there's 2 kinds of controls here. The form controls, those all can be assigned a macro. Remember how we did the button, and we were able to right-click on the button and say Assign a macro. The ActiveX controls, you can right-click on those and then say View Code, and then type in the code directly. So I'm going to save this at this time. So now we're going to go back into the presentation here, and I'm going to turn it